Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all participants. Welcome to the second day of our Fintech Summer Course 2020. And my name is Yoshia Christian, and I will be the moderator for this session. So I hope you guys have a great day today, so we can enjoy this class with our instructor that we have been invited. Okay, so before we start, I would like to say hi to our instructor, Mrs. Leslie Go. Thank you so much for joining with us. Thank you so much for the willingness to share with all participants, all students. And for your information, now there are more than 250 students from 14 countries. Yeah, there are 14. There are also international students registered in our summer course program. And yeah, before we start in this module is module 3, okay? And this module will discuss about the concept of technology and information development, what technology really looks like today, the trends, and how technology drive the digital transformation. So before we start, I would like to remind all students pertaining to several rules. So please turn on your video during the class and change your Zoom name into the format your summer course student's ID _ your name. Okay, and your summer course student ID for this summer school can be found in the file student list that we have shared to you by email. Okay, and you have to fill the attendance list. When I request you to do that, you can start filling the attendance list. You have to fill your summer school student's ID and then what module you are joining now. Okay, and this session is module 3. Once again, module 3. And yeah, the link of the attendance list will be activated only for 20 minutes. Okay, so you have to make it fast. And students can also participate in the session. If you have any question to our instructor, you can submit your question through Zoom chat box and I will read it in the Q&A session. Please mention your name and the questions. But if you want to give your question directly live to our instructor, you can use raise hand feature and then we can give you access to communicate with our instructor. Okay, so let's start this session. Before we start, I would like to introduce our instructor for today's session. She is now serving as the Senior Technology Advisor at World Bank. She is also a fellow at Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance Judge Business School and Senior Fellow at National University of Singapore Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And for almost 30 years, as a certified data architect, she specialized in advanced analytics, such as business intelligence, data visualization, machine learning, and semantic analysis. So without further ado, to Mrs. Leslie Go, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Park. Good morning to everyone. I hope, I think you can see my background. So this backdrop is the Cambridge University. I usually would have been there this summer to teach some classes, but unfortunately because of COVID, we are all locked down in Washington, DC. So I will share my screen for the presentation that I'm gonna discuss with you. So as I'm presenting my material, I will please feel free to ask questions along the way. And I ask the moderator to help me fill out the questions for me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present today and share some of the experience I have. So I've taught some parts of this course at Cambridge as well for the master program. And today we will go into a few key areas. Obviously, we have a fairly short amount of time. I would prefer to spend more time interacting with you rather than doing the presentation. So I will try to keep the material to about 40 minutes or so, or maybe even less, and then we'll leave around technology fundamentals. Then we'll get into the mobile technology, cloud, edge computing, and then AI and blockchain. Those are the areas I spend a lot of time working in this space. Now, so I also wanted to emphasize that a lot of these technology, some of them have been newer than others, but the basics of cloud technology has been around for the last 10 years. I spend most of my time in the private sector implementing tech for quite a long time. And now in the area of development, when I say development, it's sustainable development area. So at the World Bank, my role is a senior technology advisor to help our member countries around the world, in the developing world, as well as in the middle income country, to apply technology for various agenda to help ending extreme poverty and increase your prosperity. That's the goal of the World Bank. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is to try to see how we can find new approach on impact to help our member countries lift the economy out of the extreme poverty, or in some cases with COVID, we are quite busy trying to address some of the questions and also the measures from the government in terms of how will they get the path towards recovery. So many of the work that I do is closely tied with some of the space that is an intersection between technology and policy. But since today is mostly about technology, I will kind of give you a rundown of the history of the space around what we call Industrial 4.0. So you may or may not heard of that term. This is quite a common expression, Industry 4.0, because of the past few evolution of the first industrial revolution for power generation. Then it gets into industrialization, and then electronic automation. This is when the birthing of the computers and in the late 1970s. And now we're really accelerating the path of digitalization with smart automation and exponential growth of data. So what that means is that there are new opportunity of creating ways where technology comes together. So what I want to impress upon you with this slide is the use of technology at different layers. We have at the bottom layer is quantum computing that takes cloud to the next level. And I'm assuming that you have some idea what cloud computing is. And if you don't, just let me know. When I say cloud, I'm talking about the AWS from Amazon, cloud services, Google cloud services, and also Microsoft Azure and Office 365. These are the hyperscale cloud that involves networking, compute power, and also the analytics, the storage as well. So these are major technology implementations of virtualization. And so when we take into consideration of the future state of technology, there are what I call the foundational layers, such as digital technology. Then there's quantum computing, which is still something that is still evolving in the last 10 years. But then the areas around intelligence and also the space for digital and mesh or blockchain, this is the confluence of multiple technology coming together. And it's quite an interesting space because many people will talk about one or the other, like AI all blockchain, but if you start bringing together the whole entire spectrum, it becomes a very interesting combination of capabilities. So I also want to talk to you about the whole hyperscale computing and hyper connectivity. In this case, I think it's good to mention that with the access of internet, the space around connectivity, now 5G, is a critical dimension in order for us to look into how do we bring about a greater use of the platform for AI, for supercomputing or quantum computing space. And the work that we're doing right now is to make sure that there's an opportunity to connect even the rural community, not just the city and urban area, but without the connectivity, you practically cannot really have a way to communicate. For those who are in the rural areas, even in some remote places, there is potentially ways to connect via a lower bandwidth, not just 5G, because 5G is still fairly rare in many countries. So that is going to be a huge game changer in terms of the ability for you to use the internet and find ways to connect to the rest of the world. And I would say that this becomes an important criteria for what I call the innovation space for fintech. So I mentioned about cloud technology. I mentioned about the world that we're living in that's super connected, and AI, and also and now the blockchain technology. All these areas have an impact in the space of using the fintech to the next level. By the way, can I ask the moderator, there are quite a lot of pop-up that comes in from the waiting room. Can someone admit those folks, because it keeps popping up to my screen and it's very distracting. Sorry to ask for your help. I'm not used to your facilitation, so if you could just take care of the waiting room, that way it doesn't keep popping up every few seconds. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. So I would elaborate each of the key areas of fintech to kind of share with you some of the reason why I'm focusing on the use of these technology to really help drive a greater adoption. With the digital technology, one of the importance is that it lowers the cost of financial services by 80 to 90%. This is a very interesting chart that came from McKinsey that talks about various parts of financial services. One of them is account opening and maintaining an account. It lowers with digital technology, it lowers it by 65 to 75%. So these numbers, these bubbles here, are in terms of dollars, right? From $20 to $30 to $5 to $10. So cash in, cash out for the deposits and withdrawals, it lowers by 40 to 60%. And various other transactions of money transfer, it could lower it by 90 to 95%. So aggregated overall financial services, it's about 80 to 90%. That's significant. So that's why there's a huge emphasis on digital technology adoption in order to roll out more services at a lower cost. And if you look at this chart, 1.7 billion people around the world have mobile phones, but no bank account. And so how do we reach to these folks around the world? Now, if you depend on traditional methods, like what this chart is sharing with you is Western Union is about $250,000 for the Western Union rollout. And the next one is traditional bank branch is about 500,000. And but the rate of the presence keep going up on mobile phones. So you have bigger outreach to over 4 billion people because of the mobile connections. but the cost has come down significantly because you are able to access to those people who have mobile phones at almost zero cost because there's no agent involved in it. So that's the reason why mobile phones is a huge uptake in the digital financial services. And many of you may have heard of various mobile phones access for wallets. M-Pesa is a classic example that many people will talk about whenever we think about mobile money. So this is kind of a history of comparison between 2007 to 2018, and the rate of growth for mobile phone subscribers that starts at 11.34 million to now 49.5 million. The penetration has gone way up over 106.2%. And the mobile money subscription from 1.4 million to 31.6 million, that's significant. So as you can see, the growth of mobile money in the Kenya example is significant. And last year, I was honored to participate at the Afro-Asia Fintech Festival in Nairobi in July. And I have the good opportunity to have a chat with the Kenya founders of the M-Pesa and learn a lot about the Safaricom story and how that come about. It is an amazing success story, and now it become an ecosystem player. So I think it's a fantastic story in one example, but there's a lot more out there. So let me bring you to India as an example. Aadhaar, hope you have heard of that. It is a digital identity system that reaches over 1 billion people in 5.5 years. That's significant. I think when you start thinking about the massive adoption of digital identity, then together with that is digital payment. So there's a whole India stack that bring identity with digital payment together, and that is exponential growth. So the reason I'm bringing you to this is also all the tangential areas, not just for opening a bank account, but also for alternate data that you can obtain from these mobile devices. You have social network, mobile data, what we call psychometric data, and the ability for you to gather more insights about behavior pattern in addition to traditional credit bureaus or credit card. If the user do not have any of those, you have these alternate data to provide credit risk scoring in order to find out whether they're eligible for a loan or not, whether it's an individual loan or a small medium enterprise loan. So I think that's powerful. The more you digitize, the more you have information about the person who is requesting for a loan, and it really helps reduce the risk for the financial services firm. And that's why India has gone full on with this in this stack. This are the numbers from 2018, so the numbers would have gone even higher now, beyond the 1.21 billion mobile connections and 1.1 billion Aadhaar enrollment. And that with digital identity. And the whole idea of this is to reach the point of being able to access more data in order to create other additional services. And India published the National AI Strategy, which is quite remarkable. I think these are the kind of scale story from one very innovative fintech in Kenya to the other where you scale out to over 1 billion people. So in 2018, I was part of the working group for what we call the Bali Fintech Agenda. Our annual meeting in 2018 was in Bali, so we named after the country and the city that hosted this event. And it is about defining some of the core principles of fintech. And we grouped them into 4 key areas. One area is fostering an enabling environment to harness opportunity. The second area is around financial sector policy framework, talking about central banks and policymakers to create those enabling environments. The next is about balancing the risk and also improving resiliency. And the last is about bringing international cooperation and coordination together. I think that's all four pillars are fundamentally the aspects of fintech that we examine at greater level at the World Bank and with IMF colleagues as well. And what we learned from that is there are a few key factors that influence adoption of fintech in the ecosystem. And some of them are more significant than others in a given country. So one of them is about the maturity, depth, and breadth of financial services sector. In some cases, there are hugely diverse and rich products. I think Indonesia has one great example where you have e-commerce, platform economy. You also have a mobile wallet, peer-to-peer lending, and I also come to know more about the agriculture sector that is very interesting, where you're bringing together the smallholder farmers to the ecosystem. In fact, the World Bank is actually going to be hosting a public event this Thursday, an invited Tani Hub that provides the supply chain and also the financing for agriculture. A very interesting Indonesia's fintech story. The other one is around having limited infrastructure and unmet needs or demands in the country. So in Kenya, there was no significant payment rail at that time in 2007 when it first started. So M-Pesa really took off, and there was a huge demand for that. In India, there are various other opportunities and challenges as well. In China, it's a perfect example when about more than 10 years ago with Alibaba, there was an e-commerce system, and there was really a lack of a digital payment system that allows them to transact on e-commerce platform. So that's how the birth of the whole Alipay, which is a significant success story. And with each milestone, it actually creates even higher level of digitalization and innovation. The next one is around having a well-functioning trust identity and credit scoring system to reduce the risk for the ecosystem. The other thing is around some of the products that are designed that's customer-centric, and also the network effect, right? I talk about platform quite a few times. In the Indonesia ecosystem, you have a platform economy where Gojek is a significant platform. It started with ride sharing and has now become a huge platform for service of all kinds and products of variety that comes into that platform. The other thing is around enabling environment from the regulatory framework perspective. And from my understanding, both Bank Indonesia and OJK has been very strong supporter of these sort of innovation and have adopted various measures to foster innovation for fintech. And I think those are very, very important criteria for adoption of fintech. So with that said, I want to go further into some of the technology realms now that I've given you an idea of what are the fintech adoption and the landscape that will encourage more fintech in the ecosystem. One of them is around artificial intelligence. And the journey for AI is quite a long path. So I've been in this space for almost 30 years, and I've seen the evolution of looking at data from various angles. And it started usually with static reports, Excel spreadsheet, very manual intensive with dashboards and reporting. But then it gets to the next phase of visualization. That's where you get some pretty graphs and interesting interactive pie chart where you can drill down on the numbers. And if you go further, you can get into forecasting model and predicting what happened in the future. But to do that, you need a substantial amount of data to really be able to train the model and get to a level of sophistication. And then to the next level, which is the nirvana state, where many people are trying very hard to get to that point of using AI to provide recommendations and decision-making framework. For example, many of them would be in the AI chatbots and trying to use the chatbots to help you do financial services recommendation of investment portfolio. And those are a lot more personalization of the individual. So this is a good report that I will encourage you to have a look from World Economic Forum that outlines the different opportunity for AI. It talks about from one spectrum of tailoring products that is lower cost and more personalized, ubiquitous products and smarter decision-making process, and also looking at AI from interaction, decision framework, customization, prediction model, and pattern detection. So I spoke quite a lot about some of the opportunity in AI, but why is it so significant? It has exponential value compared to a traditional model. So this is a very interesting paper from Harvard Business School. They talk about the firms and the companies that really adopt AI and take advantage of some of the data that they accumulated on transactions to really refine that into business opportunity and more targeted solution. I think that is an important part of delivering more services and more value add to the consumers and the customers, as opposed to a traditional model that it takes a long time to implement some of these systems and a lot harder to monetize on these ideas. So you can see on the right-hand side, the AI computing capabilities that touches upon so many different aspects of the ecosystem. So as I talk about opportunity, I also mentioned about some of the concerns around risk. One of the areas I highlight is around AI and ethics, fairness, reliability, privacy and security, inclusion, making sure that there's no marginalized users or people who are left behind, traceability and explainability of the AI algorithm, and accountability to make sure that the system really does what it's supposed to do. So these are some of the guiding principles on AI, where they have a role in society, but what are the ethics behind that? And this is a part of the WEF, World Economic Forum paper that talks about AI in financial services and some of the ethical pitfalls where there could be biases inherent in the data and biases in the algorithm because it doesn't have the same data sets from the people who are less represented. Women as an example. If there's not enough women who are participating in the digital economy, you're not going to get as much sample size for women transactions in the training set, and therefore they will be even more left out in the final part of the solution. So we always say that there's digital economy could end up creating even more digital divide if you're not careful about that. So as I talk about some of the areas that are group some of the capabilities in key areas. When we talk about AI discipline, we're really looking at machine learning, right? The ability to adapt the model and learn over time, and using algorithms like clustering, regression, and classification. The other thing is around computer vision, recognizing an image, knowing about deep fake, where you can see how the image could be distorted by computer generated systems. And then of course, languages. I'm not talking about machine languages, but about human language, understanding all the different languages around the world and being able to process that information and create sentiment analysis or conversational platforms such as AI chatbots speech recognition. All those are within the realms of language processing. So when you bring it all together, this is the entire AI discipline that I'm referring to. So now that we've covered AI, I would transition to blockchain. I think many of you might have heard of blockchain, but I will give you some fundamentals. So we've been quite involved in blockchain for quite a few years. Even when I was in Asia, I was stationed in Asia for 3 years, covering the financial services in 17 countries. One of the things that came about as revolutionary for blockchain is that it creates it's likened to the new internet, right? The ability to connect into the internet with all these, in an environment that has low trust, where there's too many middlemen, poor coordination, and inefficiency, and lack of transparency. So the concept of blockchain came about over 10 years ago. It started with Bitcoin, but over time it evolves into several different protocols. There is Ethereum, there's Quarter, there's Hyperledger, just to name a few big ones. And then of course, there's so many other permutations of them now. So when I started that about 6 years ago, I learned a lot about the blockchain because of some of the central banks in Asia who were experimenting about that. And I'll talk about more of the experimentation by the central banks. But this is a very useful way of looking at blockchain, whether you really need blockchain or not. I think now that we've evolved in the last 6 years of blockchain technology, many of the blockchain implementations have been hype, and I think last year we saw a lot of them disappeared because of one reason or another, because it was not really founded on strong basis to really solve a problem. Many of them were going for quick wins and ICOs. The initial coin disappeared. There's a lot of scam. But I'm not saying that all blockchains are bad. There are real usage of blockchain where you're truly addressing some of the pain points. The way I see it is the two key fundamental use cases for blockchain. One is exchange of values, right? Whether you're exchanging monetary values or some intrinsic values using blockchain or tokenized assets. The second is traceability, the provenance of something, trying to figure out authenticity of a person or an identity or an entity. So these are the two core fundamental reasons why you would use blockchain. But in addition to that, this is a good document that gives you a sense of why you would explore blockchain. So this, I would highly encourage you to have a look at that, because in many cases, a simple database would be sufficient. You don't need a blockchain to solve a problem, where it's like using a power tool when a simple screwdriver should be sufficient to fix a problem. So I wanted to kind of give you a sense of where are some of the areas where blockchain is used in financial services. Well, you can see that there is a huge banking and finance is the largest use case of blockchain. The next is government. I've seen quite a few examples of that in public sector. But if you look on the right-hand side, right, capital market, bond issuance is a common example of using blockchain. Insurance is the other one. Trade finance, payments, regulatory compliance, audit, digital identity. Those are just among the top most frequently encountered use cases of blockchain. So I'll bring one close to home. When I started the World Bank in 2018, our treasurer at that time wanted to do a blockchain bond. And so we wanted to understand how to go about making that happen. Now, many could argue, do we need a blockchain bond? I would say, no, you don't. You can use a database, because it was really only 4 counterparties in that first instance of the blockchain institutional bond. But we wanted to learn by doing something about it and taking that into production, because there was so few blockchain implementation that really deploys into production environment, out of which we learned a lot about what does it take, what kind of security is needed, the level of transparency, the automation, the efficiency, and the auditing and reporting capability. So there's value for that. But if you ask me again, would I do it? I think it was good lessons learned, but there are now other examples of bond issuance on blockchain that are quite evolving into different aspects. Tokenizing the assets is another one over the years. And I want to bring a couple of examples from Singapore that are also remarkable. One of them is called Open Certs. It started by Ministry of Education together with one of the startups many years ago. I think it was around 2016, and evolves over time. Took about 4 or 5 years to evolve into what we call opencerts.io. You can go to the website and check it out. It's a very simple user interface where you can check the certificates of your education, and you get what comes back is the results of the certificate to validate your certificate authenticity for your education. And it's not just for Singapore. If you go to the website, there are a few universities outside of Singapore that participated in that. So there's a way for cross-border, for students, for foreign workers who come over to Singapore to be able to validate their certificate. And that can be done in fairly quickly, in a matter of, I would say, I have not tested because my certificates are not in the system. I am educated overseas in US, so I wouldn't have been able to test it. But from what I've heard, is within seconds or within a minute or two to get the response back. Okay, I thought that was remarkable. And the other one is supply chain digital transformation in Singapore. This example is the trade trust example. I also highly recommend you have a look at it. It's also a public example. I provided some of the public links to this by Singapore government, IMDA. They look into trade finance and found an opportunity to use blockchain as a way to reduce the amount of overhead and paperwork with the government of in the Netherlands. Rotterdam was a city that they have an agreement to try out this. And they did that recently as well, and looking into some of the open source software release of this product. And these are from all the public documents that they've released on how they go about making this a proof of concept happen. And there are 4 key areas they talked about. One is legal harmonization, which is a very important part of the trade agreement for the trade finance. The second is around the standards development of trade trusts that must comply to international standards. And the third is around accreditation structure of this technical specification for the documents. And the last is around open source that is used to develop the blockchain implementation. So I think overall it's a wonderful example of bringing that together. Now, many people, when they talk about blockchain these days, they start thinking about central bank digital currency. So I thought it'd be good to give you a flavor of what that means. There's a lot of talk around what CBDC is all about. So this is some material from IMF that talks about the role of central bank and also the role of the different types of forms of money. So money as is defined is a unit of account, means of payment, and a store of value. That's fundamentally what it is. And central bank's role is market integrity, financial stability, and monetary policy effectiveness. So when you understand the fundamentals of that, then the next few slides becomes something more meaningful. So this again came from IMF. It talks about On the left-hand side, there are different types of digital money. You have the central government issue, centralized versus decentralized. Then there's a private types. For example, in China, you have Alipay and WeChat Pay. I mentioned about M-Pesa, more centralized. Then there's also token values of using some sort of e-money. And then you start seeing things like Libra, which is decentralized form of digital money. And on the right-hand side, when you start involving central bank in the picture, you will start seeing things like CBDC. And now there's a new terminology called synthetic CBDC, where there's a hybrid of central bank digital currency with what is existing systems. So I know it sounds a bit complicated, but the paper that I highlight here is a very good source of knowledge for you to learn more about the money tree and the rise of digital money. And then we talk now about central bank digital currencies. What are the different types out there? At the core of this is the central bank's involvement in this whole setup. But if you think about, there's two key classifications. One is retail CBDC, and then there's a wholesale CBDC. The key difference is one is more for peer-to-peer and decentralized manner. The wholesale is around interbank, where the one commercial bank would clear with another commercial bank across border. So that's typically the use of the huge amount of money transfer for wholesale CBDC. And this seems to be the one that's gathering quite a lot of activities and momentum right now. And around the world, where have been the projects that I've seen? So Singapore, Project Ubin has just gone through 5 phases of central bank digital currency experimentation called Project Ubin. You have Thailand, Project Internon. You have Project Jasper in Canada. You also have Project Stella in Japan and Euro collaboration. You also have many others around the world. I'm not as familiar with all of them, but I'm familiar with the one with Project Ubin because I spent some time in Singapore with very interesting. So now that you know around the world, what are they? So these are some of the projects and the different phases of them. This slide is even a little outdated. It was done a year ago. There has been now phase 5 in Project Ubin. So you can see all the different projects with the different protocol in each one of them. And most of them tend to have published papers that describe what they learn, what are the next steps. And it's good reading if you're interested in this space. And Bank of England also recently published a working paper on this topic on possible use of CBDC use cases. And it's also a public document. I highly recommend that you have a look on why central bank would be interested in such experimentation. And the technology behind it, again, right? Decentralization, sharing of data, use of cryptography, and programmable smart contract, very important. I think I've covered the full spectrum so far of all the key technology, cloud, mobile, AI, and blockchain. This slide kind of bring it together of all the different technology. Deloitte, among many other reports out there, have put together a very nice visual representation of kind of the next 5 years. What are the trends and where do you see these technology evolving? I think this is a very interesting catchy chart that gives you a sense of where technology could be of most impact within 2 years, and then between 2 to 5 years, and 5 years and beyond. Well, a lot of this, more than 2 years from now, is all about predictions. At this point, because of pandemic, we're living in a new norm. So my guess is as good as your guess in terms of how these technology will evolve beyond 2 years and beyond. So I would stop here to take questions from you. I know I've talked at great length about all the different technology and all the different permutation. So perhaps this might be good for you to take pause for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Leslie Go, for the presentation. And now we have arrived in the Q&A session. For now, we receive some questions from the participants. Ms. Leslie? Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the first questions, these questions come from Suhari. I think she made her majors in agriculture because she asked, you mentioned about World Bank's event of fintech on agriculture, right?
Mm.
Do you have more detailed information on this event?
Yeah. Anyone can register to the event. It is this Thursday. And Tani Hub will be presenting, and I'm one of the discussants for the session. So I think it's Eastern time. Let me see. This Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So.
Okay, I hope we can answer your question, Mrs. Suhari. Okay, one participant has raised his hand, so can the control room give him the access? Calvin. Hi, Calvin. Hi, Calvin.
Hello.
Okay, so you can deliver the questions.
I cannot hear you.
Calvin, you raise your hands, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me right now?
Yes,
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Amity. Thank you very much, Ms. Leslie. It's so great presentations. My question is, this is about the technology, and you mentioned about the central bank itself. So this is like my curiosity about the central bank's independency. So from your perspective, should the central banks be independent? Since that we talk about the technology, we also talk about the consumers trust and the society trust to the central bank itself, and how the government can involve in the policy. So what can I know your perspective? Thank you very much, Ms.
Can you repeat your question? What exactly is the question?
Okay, I'm sorry. So my question is, should central bank be independent?
But central banks are independent. That is the short answer.
Oh, but like this is like so many topics and so many I'm sorry, like they also ask about their independence and their mandate on it. So yeah, maybe all central banks should be more independent, but yeah, maybe just to know about it. Maybe they can be not independent, and the government can put more involvement in there.
Do you mean that the government should be involved, or?
Yeah.
I don't understand the question. Sorry.
Maybe he asked, should the government involved in central bank's decision to adapt with the digital? Is that your questions, Calvin? Okay. How government and central banks should work together, Ms. Leslie? In terms,
when you say government, central bank is part of the government. Okay. Central bank is not an independent, it's the purpose of central bank, like I mentioned earlier, right, is about market integrity, financial stability, and monetary policy. And many of the central banks are involved in monetary policies for any given country. They are part of the government. They're not a private sector entity, if that's your question.
Okay, so yes, I mean the government, the bank, so the central bank is part of the government. So yeah, it's supposed to be like that, Calvin. Okay, so I hope we can answer your questions, Calvin. Yeah. Okay, so we go to the next questions from Sabrina. She's from Indonesia. She asks, if we're really going to use fintech or digital in the future and remove the traditional ways, there are several problems that we might face. Not all people can afford buying such as a mobile phone, and not all places have a good internet connection. Is there any solution for that case?
So it also would help if you can share which country you're from. I think you have quite a few countries. You mentioned 14 countries, right? So are you?
But, she is from Indonesia.
I see, very well. So when I say mobile phone, I don't mean by smartphone. You could use feature phone. Feature phone is fairly cheap these days. You don't have all the capabilities of a smartphone. You don't do a lot of things that you're used to on the smartphone, no smart apps and so forth, but it can do basic things like text capability. And many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are using feature phones. In some Kenya examples, they're still using feature phones, and feature phones, it could be as cheap as $10. So it would be hard to say that you cannot, someone cannot even afford a $10 phone, even in remote villages. So when I say mobile phone, I don't mean by smartphone. It means all types of mobile devices. A lot of times in sub-Saharan Africa, they use in a very creative ways, the application will use the simple text messages. You won't get a fancy apps. You will get, you know, do you want to do this transaction? Yes or no? How much do you want to send the money? And you put the number in there. There's no user interface. It's just very raw text capability. And that serves the needs of transferring the messages and also money from point A to point B. So that serves the purpose. I think if you think of all sorts of phones, not just smartphones, the affordability is there. And then you raise an important point, that's connectivity. In rural community, there's still a lot of connectivity problems. So what I've seen in some cases with agri-tech is that they would use various mechanisms like batching the process on feature phones, and they would batch it until they go to a place that has Wi-Fi capability and be able to upload those messages. So there's many different ways. Maybe out in the farm, rural community, you may not have access to the internet connections and Wi-Fi, but when you go to some hotspots and you're able to transmit those data and you batch it all up all at once, so you won't get real time. So there's many different ways of addressing this problem, but nonetheless, it exists in many of the rural community.
Okay. It exists in the rural community. Thank you for the answer. I hope we can answer your questions, Sabrina. Okay, next questions. I will read a question from Khaira. She is also from Indonesia. In the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that financial technology creates cost efficiency in transactions in financial services. But do you think it will change in the future since the advancement of technology comes with a higher cost of cybersecurity? Thank you.
Well, I think it's interesting because I recently hosted or moderated a panel with Nikki Luhur, who is your chairman of FTech, right? And FTech, for those who are not familiar, is the FinTech Association in Indonesia and a self-regulating organization. And he shared with me some of the interesting data about cybersecurity, and one of the observation is that Indonesia is number 5 on the list of cyber activities. So I thought that was very interesting because during the pandemic, we find a lot more cases of cyber attack of all sorts. And I agree that as you get more digital, there are more exposure to cyber concerns, and hence the more rigors needs to be in place to address cybersecurity issues. I posted this blog recently of the moderation that I will share it with you, since you are the moderator for this panel. I have been putting a few links here for you to share with the class.
Okay.
So, top concern for many folks. In fact, in a few weeks' time, I will be speaking at a Columbia University event that talks about cybersecurity and financial systems. So stay tuned.
Thank you. So there is another students wants to give the live question for you, Ms. Leslie. He
Okay.
is Agung Krishna. Hi, Agung.
Hello, am I audible?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you.
So I will continue. So I find that it is interesting that the involvement of central banks in the making of financial technology policy. We know that some of the central banks around the world have making of their policy about do we know about CBDC or central bank digital currency, and moreover, this involvement to this involvement to this financial technology sectors leading to the chance that the banks will have higher involvement in cryptocurrency, such as maybe Ethereum, Bitcoins or Litecoin, and etc. And my question is that with the involvement of central bank in this new kind of cryptocurrencies, is it possible that the change of value in these cryptocurrencies will affect the transmissions of the macroeconomics or any economics policy that the central banks are trying to make? And will it affect more, like will it cause inflation or etc.? Thank you.
You're asking a lot of different things that so I think we'll kind of unpack that. When I talk about central bank issued digital currency, I am not talking about it is a very, very well thought through process. It's not any crypto assets out there. It is not Bitcoin. It is not any of them that are publicly traded right now. I'm referring to a method of creating a token out of the systems where they have defined purpose, and it's not for speculation. So the design of central bank issued digital currency is extremely well put together. That's why I highly recommend you have to look at the Bank of England paper that they publish, where they talk about the different dimensions of and the use case scenario, why and how they would design a CBDC. So it has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, has nothing to do with Bitcoin, and is not for speculation. So that's why there's no speculative elements to this. I would highly encourage you to have a look at some of the papers that I mentioned earlier for you to gain a greater understanding of this. All about. And in a lot of cases, the discussion around the CBDC is that it has to be packed against a denominator against the currency of the country. For example, if it had been UK, it will be denominated in UK sterling. So you're pretty much creating a value that has a fundamental basis, not for speculation, more around the purpose that was designed in terms of the use of CBDC. I hope that answered your question.
So is there any questions, Mr. Agung? Okay, so we move to the questions coming in the chat box. Okay, good morning. My name is Audrey Chin from Malaysia. My question is, if artificial intelligence technology is applied worldwide, what is the expected time for it to completely replace the traditional ways? Secondly, if the AI would replace all the analytical careers such as accountancy, what will happen to people who work in that career? Thank you.
Well, I could not give you a projection of how long it's going to take. I think it's going to take a long time. There will be some areas that are more disrupted than others. I think if you look around during COVID, when we could not go out and we are focusing on contactless experience because of the virus exposure, you see robots delivering the e-commerce packages. You see drones delivering. You see contactless transaction. I think these are examples of what the new normal would be, because once you experience automation and the sort of ease of use, you probably don't go back, right? Lee Kai-Fu, who wrote a very interesting book on the AI superpower, I highly recommend you have a look at that. He actually talks a lot about the disruptions of AI. But he also did not give a date of when AI will become the norm instead of a disruption. It's a very interesting paper that I pasted here for you as well. I put a bunch of stuff for you that you can distribute to the rest of the class. And he talks about a personal experience of how during COVID, he sees more automation and more AI, and robots are out in warehouses disinfecting the cargoes and the goods in the warehouse because they are not subjected to the virus attack compared to humans. So it would be jobs that are impacted. I am not going to deny that, but I cannot tell you how many. Yes, there will be more and more adoption of AI and robotics because it's cheaper and it's less risky in some cases, right? So, but I don't know when will it become proliferated use of AI. I think human would still be in the picture if I were to forecast what the future will look like, because you still need human to make decisions. Will it be in my lifetime? I think that in my lifetime and your lifetime, you see more AI adoption, but I think humans are still needed, in the short answer. But I think the nature of the jobs will change. More around data-driven, more around the knowledge of using, what is it called, automation, more decision-making process where you are humans are intervening to give better guidance rather than just following the machine algorithm. So I think those are key to understand. But the reality is that many jobs will be replaced. That's why there are so many programs out there, government intervention to provide capacity building so that there's more people who are trained on data and AI to prepare for the future. I hope that addresses the question. I can't hear you. You're on mute right now.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, you mentioned about the new normal and COVID-19. So do you think that this pandemic is just the sign that the world and the financial sectors, or maybe all sectors in the world, needs to start understanding the importance of technology? Do you agree with that statement?
I would say that the pandemic is a catalyst for digitalization. And for instance, since March, we have been in lockdown. What I'm using is my mobile device, my laptop, to stay connected and stay productive. And I'm able to get my grocery delivered on e-commerce platform. And I don't have to use cash because I'm using my credit card and mobile payment. So I think it's just, for me at least, I'm in Washington, D.C. right now. So may not be the case for every country, but I think I'm hearing similar stories in China and India and many other places. My friends in Indonesia, we communicate almost on a weekly basis. They're telling me similar stories where during the lockdown, the use of technology is even higher than before. So there will be many of the enterprises more digital technology in order to replace the human touch over time, because it's cheaper and it's faster in many ways. And so you're able to deliver more capabilities, and that's more tailored for the needs of the consumers. So I think it's just the new normal will be even faster digitalization, because now that we have a taste of it, even in fact, Ibu Sri Mulyani, your Minister of Finance, made a very clear note. She put a public posting of her blog that talks about reconsidering what work will be like in the new normal, right? When the pandemic's over, do we still need to travel so much? Can we do things more efficiently with digital technology?
Thank you, Miss Leslie. So there are still a lot of questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You decide.
Yeah. Okay. The question is from Joan. I think she's from Indonesia.
Okay.
She said the utilization of blockchain nowadays is massively growing. How could this blockchain integrate fintech and banks within one ecosystem in purpose to assure the security and privacy?
Okay, so repeat the first part for me again, please.
The question?
The first part of the question.
Oh, okay. The utilization of blockchain nowadays is massively growing.
Yeah.
And how
I wouldn't say massively. I haven't seen so many that is in production.
Oh, okay.
There's only a handful of them that are in production. There's a lot of talk, a lot of hype, a lot of proof of concept, but very few that are in production in the last 6 to 10 years.
The last 6 to 10 years. So how could this blockchain integrate fintech and banks within one ecosystem?
How do they integrate with what?
How could this blockchain integrate fintech and banks within one ecosystem in purpose
fintech and banks?
To assure the security and privacy?
Well, they're kind of two different things, right? Fintechs provide a lot of different services. They take banking services and they unbundle it and so forth. So blockchain doesn't integrate fintech and banks. They don't, right? Banks are doing the blockchain experimentation. Fintech are doing their own. I would not come to the conclusion that blockchain is bridging the two worlds. Not at all. I would say that surprisingly, in the last 10 years, blockchain hasn't really taken off as much as someone would have hoped. You look around the world, how many of the blockchain project has really gone live? Very few.
Okay, so thank you. And another questions. Okay, from Laras. She lives in Jogja, Indonesia. Of AI in the role of society are really important because in Indonesia, there might be a rejection on AI. Without a proper education, it could be an obstacle for AI development in Indonesia, or even we might fall behind to other countries who already use AI, which is the key impact in fintech. So how do we overcome this challenge? I mean, the skill. I think she said about the skill.
Oh, the AI skills.
Yes.
I think you're right that you need to build capacity for AI skills. And there's a lot that needs to be done. I mean, I can speak about Singapore because I'm on the board of directors for Singapore GovTech, and there's so much program that Singapore has put together. There's Skills Future to help the training of not just the students, but the mid-level career to help pivot into learning more AI skills. There is AI Singapore. There's various different curriculums. There's a lot of free online courses. I think if you really want to learn AI, there's no shortage of courses. Many people can, I was talking to a few of the high school students recently before they have a summer before they go to college, and they were able to pick up Python coding and some of the AI skills on their own using Coursera, using some of the free online courses. So if you really want to learn, the courses are there. It's all free online. That's the beauty of it. But the question here is, are people willing to learn? Or are they just going to sit and let the wave of new technology disrupt them and make them irrelevant? I think that the latter part is more the case, unfortunately. And you're also dealing with people who are at a different stage in their career. Maybe they're at a later point where it's harder for them to pick up new skills. So we have to be empathetic. Where some of them are manager or senior managers, if they get laid off during the pandemic, it's really hard for them to go pick up Python, right? Because they don't even know the basic programming, much less learning new programming language. So we have to be realistic. But in terms of learning skills on AI, there's so much free courses out there. Every one of the tech companies has been giving away free courses. You look at Microsoft, you look at Google, you look at AWS, they're all free on their website. So learning these skills is all readily available, but you have to take the initiative and time to go learn it. That's your investment for yourself. I think that would be time well spent if there is an interest in a growth mindset to continuously learn and improve.
So what are the skills, in your opinion, I mean, Leslie, needs to be developed by the students now? Because there are many opportunities open for new students if they can't adapt with the skills that is now needs to develop. What are those skills?
So we're talking about students here, right? Because
Yeah.
they're different spectrums, right? I would say basic data literacy, no matter what discipline you are. I think picking up some ideas on how data works, visualization, pick up various visualization tools out there. There's so many of them. There's Tableau, there's Power BI, there's various free and open source visualization tools. That way you get a hang of how do you take an Excel spreadsheet and create an interactive chart and be able to drill down and do some real-time manipulation of the data, right? Some basic data literacy is definitely important. And then you also have other things like learning Python or learning programming skills will be useful, right? But that's if you're really getting more involved in data space. Learning more about some of the AI capabilities are very useful for you to decipher what are the deeper end of the knowledge you want to go into further. So I think those are the basics. If you do a search on the internet on some of the AI or data literacy skills, you'll get plenty of them. I don't have all the curriculum memorized because I don't teach the basic courses. I usually teach the master classes and beyond. So I would suggest if that's an interest, just do a quick search on the internet. You'll get a lot of the basic AI or data literacy program.
So basic data literacy. Okay. So another questions. Is there any students wants to give a question directly to Mrs. Leslie? No? Okay. So I have to read another questions coming in the
That's
chat
too
box.
shy.
Yeah. Okay. The questions comes from Adianto from Universitas 11 Maret Indonesia. What do you think? What do you think is the best way to ensure cybersecurity? And the second question, according to COSO's report, the use of blockchain may present issues on obtaining sufficient appropriate evidence to support an organization financial record. For example, due to the loss of the transaction audit trails in an electronic environment. Based on the possible threat, could you please explain how to prevent it?
The first one I can answer, but the second one I don't really quite understand the question. So maybe I'll answer the cybersecurity, and then and we'll have to repeat the question for the second part. Sounds good?
Yeah, you can answer the first question.
I think there's a lot that you can do. Basic cyber hygiene is important, right? So one thing that you'll find that there are different types of cyber attack that's out there. From DDoS attack, I'm not giving a class on cyber right now. So, but there are quite a few different types of cyber security attack. And one thing that is good to know is that prevention is better than cure, right? So we'll find a way to make it higher level of deterrence for cybersecurity and being more vigilant. Every organization these days are very careful about creating what we call cyber hygiene. And that means that you have to constantly be able to step up in terms of preventing, creating these kind of, exercise internally within the organization so that you do not click on any phishing attack where a link looks like a legitimate but is coming from some sources that's doing some social engineering to fish for some information on the account, some personal information. So those basic hygiene needs to be there. And then the organizations will need to focus a lot on making sure that there are software that's constantly detecting what's going on to make sure that the perimeters are always protected, the cyber virtual perimeters. I'm not talking about physical perimeters. Making sure that the systems are well protected at all times. The patches are always in place for systems. Don't use pirated products. A lot of the pirated products do not have security patches. When you look around the world, the countries that are most cyber secure, with the most amount of cyber attacks, are the country that has a lot of bootlegger products, which means you're using software that are unlicensed, because this software tends to have no security fixes, and the vendors do not take responsibility for it because you didn't pay for the software. And therefore, you end up having a lot of these botnet attack and a lot of these, various cyber intrusion because you're pretty much leaving the back door open, right? It's as if you're going into a place where there's no way of safeguarding all the key assets in your perimeter. So I think it's important for you to do basic cyber hygiene. So protect, detect, and defend, and be able to respond very quickly. So NIST, which is the National Institute of Science and Technology, has posted a lot of good guidance on cybersecurity. I highly recommend that you have a look at them. So that's your first question. What was the second question?
Okay, he said, according to COSO's report, the use of a blockchain may present issues on obtaining sufficient appropriate evidence to
Evidence
support,
of what?
to
Sorry.
support the transactions
Okay.
recorded in the organizational financial records. Based on the possible threat, could you please explain how to prevent it? I mean, is there any issues?
I don't really
when,
understand the question.
maybe
Sorry.
he asked, is there any issues, another issues when the organizations apply the blockchains to support transactions?
Can the person who asked that question provide more context?
Or it 100% helps the organizations?
I truly do not understand the question. So if the person who asked that question can provide more context, that would be helpful.
Okay,
Sorry.
Okay, so we go to the next question, Ms. Leslie.
Thank you.
Yeah. From Shania, she is from Indonesia, I think. Is there any standard algorithm sets by the World Bank for banks that want to apply fintech?
Is there what?
Any standard algorithm set by the World Bank for banks that want to apply fintech?
You mean, what do you mean by algorithm? Sorry.
She didn't mention it. She just, I mean, she didn't mention what algorithm she means for, but, or how can we suggest for banks that want to apply fintech? Maybe she wants to ask about that.
Again, I really don't understand the question. Maybe the person could clarify. What do you mean by banks want to apply for fintech?
Okay, so Shania, maybe you can give the context, the clear context, so Ms. Leslie can answer your questions. Okay, so I think I have read all questions from the students.
Great.
So once again, is there any students wants to give the question directly to Ms. Leslie?
So maybe there might be some confusion. World Bank is not your traditional, because it's not a technology company. If you're thinking about like AI algorithm, World Bank is a multinational development bank, which means we focus on working with governments to provide fundings for in programs to help the government with various projects, for example, building the roads, building schools, helping with government digital program, helping various initiatives for connectivity. So we really don't provide algorithms, if that's what you're thinking of. So we provide advisory and we provide funding for government for these big initiatives. I hope that makes sense. And if you may not know what World Bank does, we have a pretty good website that describes the World Bank's mission of ending extreme poverty and increasing shared prosperity from around the world. And we have 189 member countries. So you can have a look at that. And then with regards to banks and fintech, many banks are already doing fintech. When I say fintech, it's really about bundling and unbundling financial services in using technology. That's really what it is. Most banks are already doing fintech out there that I know of. Many of the large banks have various mechanisms of using fintech, using AI for credit scoring, using mobile banking, using various mechanisms for eKYC, as an example. So they're all trying different new creative ways of doing fintech. So the lines have been blurred already. But no, the World Bank do not give algorithm to the banks.
Okay, okay. 2 or 3 questions coming.
Okay.
Ms. Leslie, okay. Hello, Ms. Leslie, I'm Anissa from Indonesia. With the growing fintech and technology in general, there is a growing concern regarding surveillance capitalism. What do you think the ethical boundaries of data mining, trading, and surveillance are for corporation? And what do you think are the proposed solution for that concern?
Can you help me and clarify the question? Data
Uh,
mining?
the ethical boundaries of data mining, trading, and surveillance.
Data mining surveillance. Wow, this is a hard topic. I think we need to continuously raise the bar on AI and ethics. In fact, today, this morning, I was on a panel with Bank of England, and we were talking about AI. And I raised the topic around AI and ethics, very important thing to talk about among regulators and central banks, because we definitely need to bring about greater awareness of some of the ethical principle I explained earlier on, and some of the EU published guidelines, and have a measured approach on how we go about collecting data, using the data, processing the data, and how we are protecting the consumer privacy and data security. So Singapore is a good example. They've taken this approach and creating this AI model framework, which I highly encourage you to have a look. That would be one good example of good guidance, good sound guidance on how to go about using AI in society at large, and looking at the accountability and transparency aspect of it.
Thank you, Ms. Leslie. Question from Irdan Ardianatama. He asked, does General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, GDPR law changes the way how companies gather sensitive data that are needed for development of an accurate AI?
Absolutely, without a doubt. But not every, so GDPR came out and became effective, I believe, in May 2018. And it has been the gold standard for many parts around the world. The compliance for GDPR is critical for those who do business with EU and European entities. And that standards has now been translated and localized in many different countries. I would say that it does raise the bar, but not all countries need to be GDPR compliant if you're not required to. So I think that it sets a new standard that needs to be contextualized for each country, who need to look into their own data policies, and also be able to set new rules and regulations in order to adopt that for your own country. So I think that's very important. I would say that the GDPR provides a good framework. You still have to do your due diligence in terms of creating your own standards.
Okay, one question from Malaysia, Ms. Leslie.
Okay.
Does it affect the banking industry in terms of efficiency or competition for the long term? And what do you think? Does downsizing of banks could happen due to this fintech?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the later part of the question. Can you help me understand?
Okay, does the growing in fintech affect the banking industry in terms of efficiency and competition, long-term competition? And does downsizing of bank could happen due to this fintech?
I see. Well, the fintech in the last 10 years or 15 years have been disrupting the banking industry, no doubt about that. It's proving that you can do things cheaper, faster, and more customer centric, right? So without a doubt, it has created a wake up call for the banks in the last 10 to 15 years that I know of. I think, is it going to downsize the bank? I don't know. I don't work for banks, so I couldn't tell you whether fintechs are going to downsize the banks or not. But what I know is that the banks are starting to adopt various methods like agile methodology to try out new approach so that they can compete against the fintech. So I think you'll see many banks who have already done that. They have been experimenting, creating sandboxes, innovating quickly. So I would say that it has been, it has reached quite a significant impact to banking sector and disrupted them. And in some cases, the banks are partnering with fintech because we find that over the last 5 years, fintech does not necessarily, it's not a winner take all. It's about finding the right collaboration and partnership. For example, in my panel on July 15, I had Jumo who presented, who was one of the panelists from South Africa, and they provide digital credit scoring for using alternate data from mobile records and other mechanisms for behavior information. And they work with banks to provide these kind of, because they don't lend from their own book, they work with banks to provide financing for small, medium enterprises. So there you go, that's a perfect example. They've grown significantly. They've done very, very well. So I would say that instead of saying winner takes all, there could be many ways of collaborating together.
Okay, there will be good collaborations. And before we go to the last questions, I would like to remind all students that we have activated the attendance list. So you can the attendance list for 20 minutes. So you can fill with your student's ID and then the module you are joining now. You join module 3, okay, module 3. The last question, Ms. Leslie from Indonesia, from Firda, Indonesia. With the transnational nature of wholesale CBDC, are there any problems regarding the gap of regulation between countries?
With the transformation of CBDC, are there what?
Are there any problems regarding the gap of regulation between countries?
Oh, this is a tough one to answer because there's so many, each countries have different regulations, right? I wouldn't be able to tell you, there's so many countries around the world. I mentioned the ones that are most progressive in terms of experimenting with CBDC. I don't cover every single country around the world, so I couldn't comment on that. I think you'll find that many central banks, will come up with their own view on what makes sense for the country and announce them if they want to make it public. In some cases, you wouldn't know until for quite a few years they did not announce what they're experimenting. So, but I couldn't tell you whether it's going to address the gaps or not because there's so many different regulations in each country. The ones I cover are mostly in developing country. Singapore is an exception because I was based there for 3 years. But I would say that it needs to be contextual for the country and to have a fit for purpose. You don't do CBDC for the sake of CBDC, right? You have to really find the right use case to do it. So I think that's my suggestions. And I think there are some benchmark studies out there of a few top CBDC examples around the world. They don't even do every single one because there's no way to go about studying them if they're not making the CBDC public in the domain. And I also wanted to, as a wrap up, to first thank you for hosting this session. I think you're asking a lot of good questions. I think some questions are harder for me to answer because I don't have visibility to every single country. And some questions are very interesting and it shows your level of curiosity. I would say continue reading up more on this. There's a lot out there. I've pasted a bunch of them in the chat window for the moderator to share with you. I think continue your pursuit in this space. You'll find that there's a lot of interesting new development. It's a fast-moving train. Even I have to keep up with it on a daily basis. But I think it's an exciting space. I also believe that Indonesia is a very interesting market. It's the 4th largest population in Indonesia when it's safe to travel, because my husband actually works for IFC, which is a private arm of the World Bank. And so we look forward to making Indonesia our new home and to learn more about the fintech community in Indonesia. I think it's a fascinating place to experiment, where the regulators are progressive and working together with the fintech community. So I hope in due time I'll get a chance to meet you in person. But for the time being, we will communicate via virtual sessions of this nature. But also very importantly, I did mention earlier, what I'm sharing with you is not an official World Bank capacity. I'm sharing with you from my personal experience and also from my academic background. So please be mindful that whatever I say today is not official World Bank message. So I'm very careful about that because I'm not representing World Bank in this session. I'm sharing knowledge based on what I've learned and what I've also taught in other academic environments. So with that, I want to thank you and wish you all the best in your learning journey, and grateful for the chance to be part of this session with you. Thank you so much. Terima kasih.
So thank you, Ms. Leslie Go, for your time, for being one of the outstanding speaker in our 5-day summer course. And hope you have a great day and hope you enjoy. Where will you come to Indonesia? You will stay in
We
Indonesia?
don't know yet.
Okay.
When it's safe to travel. Yeah.
Okay, Indonesia will happily welcome you to my country.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, all the best for the rest of the class, and thank you so much for the time together. Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.
Yeah, all students, that's all the end of this session with Mrs. Leslie Go, and we will have a break for 15 minutes. So before we start the module 5, module 5 will talk about the fintech application and collaboration in e-commerce industry with one of the experts of one of the big e-commerce company in Indonesia. So we will have a break for 15 minutes. We suggest you to just turn off your video, or you can leave the meeting first and then be back on time in 15 minutes. And don't forget to fill the attendance list before we start the module 5. So thank you so much for joining the module 3 session with Mrs. Leslie Go. Hope you have a good insight and new insight about the fundamental of the technology. So I'm Yosha Christian Mahulete. Thank you so much, and see you on the module 5 with Aulia as the moderator.